What's going on, college football fans, and welcome back to the First and Long College Football Show. I'm your co-host, as always, Marcus. Flying solo today. Mason is out on a little trip, a little cruise. I hope you're having a good time out there, Mason, and stay safe. We'll see you this weekend to watch some college football, brings me to what we're here to talk about today. We've got a Big 12 matchup. Oklahoma State at Kansas State. Kansas State is favored by 2.5 in this one. The over-under is set at 55.5. Both teams coming off of two different types of losses here. Kansas State goes and gets a big surprise on the road at the BYU Cougs. Ends up just absolutely getting drummed there. I believe it was 36-9, something to that effect. Not even close. Avery Johnson struggles in that one. Throws some interceptions. They got 3 turnovers in total there for Kansas State. Defense actually played well enough to win that football game, but the offense was not able to play complementary football and reciprocate with the defense there. And then Oklahoma State, of course, coming off the loss to Utah, Cam Risingless Utah, in a game in which Alan Bowman found himself pulled by Coach Gundy there. Wranglar comes in, the backup quarterback, struggles mightily, as you might expect a backup quarterback to do in a high-pressure situation like that. And then Bowman comes back in the football game, and they're able to somewhat make it a close football game, end up losing that one 22-19 to Utah. And look, I mean, you had a really good defense in that football game, but let's don't get it twisted. Oklahoma State played their worst game offensively that I think they possibly could have played against Utah, and you could say the same exact thing for Kansas State. Let's talk about these teams a little bit. We'll start with Oklahoma State, with them being the visiting team in this matchup. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for Oklahoma State in my mind. This is one of the oldest, most experienced groups of offensive linemen in the country that's really ever graced the field for a college football team. Every single one of these offensive linemen is a 6-year or 7th-year COVID senior, graduate transfer, whatever they're all older fellas, been around the block, tons of experience, and for whatever reason, this Oklahoma State offensive line cannot run block. And it's really quite a shame because you've got the young national known talent after what he did last year, 1,700 total yards last year for Ollie Gordon, the standout running back there at Oklahoma State. He hasn't been much of a standout this season. I think he had one good game earlier this season, but so far this year, averaging 3.5 yards per carry on 73 carries, 258 yards. He does have 4 touchdowns, which is not terrible, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I'm literally scratching my head because my head itches, but it actually is a head-scratching thing. I don't understand it. I would have thought this would have been the perfect recipe for Oklahoma State this year to be able to run the football. And this is a bad game to try to figure out how to do that because that is the strength of this Kansas State defense, is stopping the run. So I don't expect Oklahoma State to be able to run the ball a whole lot in this football game. I think it's going to be really tough. Oklahoma State, it's no secret, has made their hay through the air this season. As long as Alan Bowman isn't making a boneheaded decision, and we talk about some of the oldest players in college football, Alan Bowman is an older fella. He's been around college football for a long time, and it seems like once a game he makes a decision that, it actually will physically make you scratch your head, and I'm sure that's probably why Gundy pulled him this past week, which I didn't necessarily agree with in that situation. But that's how this offense has made their hay this year, throwing the football. You've got some really, really good wide receivers there in Rashad Owens, Stribling, and Caleb Presley also. Between those guys, you've already got 8 touchdowns this season. A lot of the production comes from that. This is one of the best passing offenses in the country as far as statistically goes. they're going to need to be able to run the football to the tune of better than 3 yards per carry in this matchup if they're looking to go on the road and beat the Kansas State Wildcats in this one. Oklahoma State's done a really, really good job protecting the quarterback and in pass protection as far as that offensive line goes. So it really is just one of those dimensions of the game that they're just kind of missing right now. Defensively, for Oklahoma State, it's an odd situation, really. It really, really is. You got a guy like Trey Rucker who has just absolutely torn it up this season, 53 total tackles. But the issue with that is Trey Rucker is a safety, and he's coming up and making a ton of stops. And while it's nice to have a guy like Trey Rucker and have that luxury of a guy that's such a sure tackler and got such a nose for the football, you got to wonder, you would hope that would be, kind of dispersed between your linebackers and the rest of your defense. Trey Rucker, Nick Martin are two really, really high spots. Nick Martin has 39 tackles so far this season in his own right. A sack, a couple of pass deflections, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery. Nick Martin is a multi-tool on the defense there at linebacker. And one of the best linebackers, I think, in college football. And Trey Rucker is one of the best sure tackling safeties in college football, one could argue. But that is not a good depiction, these two guys, of what this defense is actually all about. 92nd in the country in average yards per rush allowed at 4.53. They're allowing more yards per rush than they're gaining on offense, which is always a bad sign. 280.8 yards per game passing allowed this season so far. That's good for 122nd in the nation, almost dead last. I mean, close to dead last there. 7.5 yards per attempt allowed passing. That's good for 94th in the country. So there's really not a ton of great aspects to this defense as far as like yards, statistics, averages, things like that. They're a bend don't break style defense, and there's really no secret about that. They get sacks, they do create some havoc. They will hurry your quarterback up a little bit. 5 interceptions, 3 fumble recoveries, so their positive turnover margin, which has really helped to mask some of the deficiencies there defensively for Oklahoma State this season. So if they're not getting turnovers, they're getting burned. And we'll transition that over to Kansas State here, because Kansas State has had a little bit of issue turning the football over this season. Now, most of that was in this past game for Avery Johnson, who had a few turnovers himself against BYU. Avery Johnson this season, 61.1% completion percentage, averaging 6.5 yards per pass, which I'm not, and I'll get to it here in a second, but I'm not putting that all on Avery Johnson. But this is a young quarterback who went on the road last week and had a really, really bad football game. There's been moments throughout this season that Avery Johnson has made mistakes, and it had not really bit Kansas State in the butt quite yet. And it did this past weekend. All their mistakes, I mean, when you go out on the road, it doesn't matter what conference you're in or if it's BYU or Alabama. When you go out on the road, you're under a microscope. Your issues are under a microscope. And Avery Johnson has got he's very talented running the football. I think that as of right now, that's the best side of his game. And part of that, I think, as well, is because this wide receiver room, I just don't think is very super explosive. You've only got a couple of receivers with double-digit catches even on the team. Brown and Johnson there. Brown with 199 yards, 15.3 average, no touchdowns this year. Johnson, 10 receptions. That's not a lot of receptions, first of all, for your second leading receiver, but 109 yards. That's good for 10.9 average, which is not bad. But no touchdowns for him either. You got a couple of tight ends, Lofton and Swanson there, who've got 4 receiving touchdowns. And so I just feel like you're missing something at the wide receiver position on this offense at this point. And maybe this is a get-right game for Kansas State, as they're going to be facing, as I said, one of the worst passing defenses in the country, statistically, in Oklahoma State. So maybe this is a get-right game. I know Avery Johnson and Kansas State fans hope so, but the bread and butter for this offense is running the football. And that's what you're going to have to do with DJ Giddens in this football game, and I think you're going to have every opportunity to do so. We just saw Utah this past week. Look, it was no secret what the game plan was. Cam Rising didn't play. It was no secret that Bernard was going to be running the football for Utah in that football game, and he had 250 plus or around 250 yards rushing in that football game and just absolutely drubbed that Oklahoma State. I mean, just beat them to a pulp. So we've seen that plan of action already work for Utah last week. I'm not sure that Kansas State is as strong on the offensive line, but they've done a really good job running the football so far this season. DJ Giddens, 6.1 yards per carry so far this year with a touchdown. And as I said, Avery Johnson, he is really good with the football in his hand. Got to get him out on the edges. I think you're going to have a very clear advantage getting the edge in the football game, setting the edge, running off tackle and getting the edge with those running backs. Johnson, 261 yards rushing, 6.7 yards average carry there. No touchdowns on the ground yet for him. And then you got Dylan Edwards, who's more of the specialist. Watch out in the special teams game. He's already returned a punt this year for a touchdown. Edwards is not a guy that you're ever going to be able to run between the tackles, but I think this is the perfect game for him. I think this is the perfect game to be able to let him eat on those edges and hopefully be able to keep your quarterback healthy and progressing. As I said, Avery Johnson is really young and really inconsistent at this point. Yeah, I think it's going to be really important to get out to a fast start, get some easy throws, and get him acclimated to this football game. 6.4 yards per pass is good for 106 in the country, and that's what this Wildcats team is averaging yards per pass. 160.5 passing yards per game. That's 117th in the country there as well. So I think you got a good opportunity here to be able to pass the football around a little bit. We'll see if Kansas State is able to do that. The biggest thing is going to be being able to protect the quarterback. Oklahoma State, as I said, they're not a team that is a great defense or anything like that, like in between the 20s or anything, but they are disruptive, and they can get after your quarterback. They've got 9 sacks so far this season, and with the way Avery Johnson likes to move around in the pocket, you got to make sure that you don't give up too many of those sacks this coming up weekend. Defensively for Kansas State, the secondary is where the weakness lies. I like the front seven. I think the front seven is really, really solid, and I think you're going to be able to continue to let Oklahoma State do what they've been doing as far as rushing the ball, which is not doing that very well. So I think that the front seven is going to be fine here as far as against the run. Oklahoma State's done a great job of protecting the quarterback. They've allowed 1 sack this season. That was last week, kind of in a desperation situation there at the end of the game. Utah does get Bowman on the ground 1 time, and that's the only time he's been sacked all year. As I said, that Oklahoma State passing protection unit is good. They can't run block, but they can pass block. But this defense has been good against the run, like I said, for Kansas State. I don't think that's going to be a problem, considering Oklahoma State can't run the football anyway. The biggest thing is going to be keeping these guys at bay through the air. Oklahoma State is one of the best passing offenses in the country. Last week, they had a really bad week against Utah, but Utah is very physical. And Alan Bowman does some boneheaded things sometimes, but typically doesn't have a bad game all the way through like he did this past week. It was just a terrible, terrible football game, and I think it was the perfect storm. But every defensive coordinator in the country has got to be looking at, or every defensive coordinator that has to play Oklahoma State anyway, is going to be looking at that film from this past week. And I know that Kansas State is going to be looking at that film and developing some type of a plan for this offense. Those 3 wide receivers, though, that I mentioned, Owens and and Presley and Stribling, those guys are really, really good. And I don't see them having a poor offensive performance like they had last week. I don't think that you can count on it. And Vegas, I think, agrees with that, with the over-under being set at 55.5 for this one. So with all that being said, with every bit of that being said, I want to take the home team here. I really do. -2.5. These are my early thoughts for the week. Look, we're going to dive even deeper into this game. We're going to have all the stats graphicked up, all that good stuff on our Tuesday live show. So we'll give our full preview and prediction on Tuesday for this game. But as of right now, I'm leaning Kansas State. I think it's going to be a get-right game for them. They're favored by 2.5 right now. I could see them winning by a field goal here. I like that half hook there. And over-under set at 55.5. I'd like to say under in this football game. Just the way that we saw Oklahoma State kind of sputter last week. I think that under is going to be the play in this one. I think Kansas State is going to look to play ball control in this game. Try not to make too many mistakes through the air. We've seen Kansas State be really conservative at certain points of the season so far, and I think it's because they're trying to protect this young quarterback. I think they continue to do that. Let your running backs bang on this defense and wear them out, run the clock, and I think that results in a little bit lower scoring, the clock running and the score being a little lower in this one. Give me the under 55.5 on this one, and give me Kansas State -2.5. We'll see you on Tuesday for the live show. Come join the show. Tell me why I'm wrong. We'd love to have you. Thanks for watching the First and Long College Football Show.